It is an honor to host everybody here in this event, and I think it's been about over a year we've been waiting for this event. And thank you very much for being here. For those that are following online, thank you very much for being there as well. We'd like to get started, and I would like to call in Brad, who is going to talk a little bit about giving back to Malembe Rise, which used to be giving back to Africa. Talk about the team, the work, and a lot more. Brad?
Thank you. Good evening and welcome. As Eli said, I'm Brad Long and I'm the chairman of the board of directors with Malembe Rise. For everyone who is here in person tonight and watching online, thank you for being with us. I hope you're as excited as I am to hear Tayo speak tonight about topics that are relevant to each and every one of us, and especially now. Before I introduce you to Malembe Rise, and the work that we do, I would like to thank our generous sponsors for tonight's event. In no particular order, we have Capital Group, Silver in the City, the Brenner family, Prodigy Burger Bar, Young and Larimore, Communication Loop, Lucidia IT, and Mosier Consulting. If you see any of them here tonight, I don't know if any were able to make it, but if you know of any of those and see them here around Indianapolis, be sure to give them some love. We're very grateful for their support and what they have done to continue to support education in Indianapolis and make Indianapolis such a great place to live and work. You can also stop by the events page on the Malembe Rise website, and there are links to each one of those sponsors if you want some more information about them. Next, I'd like to introduce the Malembe Rise board members. These folks are all very passionate, intelligent, hardworking, and humble, and I enjoy every minute I get to spend with them. It's a complete joy being a member of this board. You already know me, but the other group that we have with us, Amy Zeigert, is our vice chair. And then Lauren Miller, who is joining us remotely tonight from Virginia, is our recording secretary and our acting treasurer. Next is Maria Brown, who is virtual most of the time from her home in Kentucky with her family. Joel McMillan, who has been with us a couple years and is virtual from overseas at this point. For the next several months. And then Rebecca Segrist, who is responsible for a large portion of our programming and curriculum development, and just works harder than most people that I know. I don't know how she spends time to do everything that she does. Rounding out the remaining board members are Natalie Ebaugh, and our two newest members are Danielle Baresh and Daria Vincesi. I can't speak highly enough about each one of these people, and if you get a chance to see any of them tonight, for those of us that are here, make sure to stop them and say hi. Lastly, but not least importantly, let me introduce you to our country directors and teachers. Dr. Jerry, Eli's father, he is our country director in the Democratic Republic of Congo, in the capital city of Kinshasa. Dr. Jerry has been with Malembe Rise pretty much since the beginning, and he's the heart of this organization. I wish he could be here with us tonight, but where he lives, it's been hard to come by vaccines, and travel just hasn't been possible for him to this point. Dr. Jerry is a force of nature, to say the least. His ability and passion for networking and oversight of the operations in the DRC have made this organization what it is today. The rest of us rally around his positivity, his boundless energy, and his contagious smile and laugh. I hope that very soon he can be here with us in person so we can all share in what makes him such a powerful leader for our cause. On this side of the pond, our U.S. country director is Sarah Castor, who's here tonight. If you just take all the great things I said about Dr. Jerry and put them in a different package, that's Sarah. Sarah has been breathing new life into Malembe Rise since she joined us in 2019. Her experience and education in philanthropy, Her wisdom and graceful leadership, and her boldness and fresh ideas have raised the bar for what we can achieve. She won't agree with most of what I'm saying about her, but it's all true, I guarantee it. And now for our teachers, who we can't go without introducing here tonight. I may butcher all of their names, but here they are. They're wonderful guys. And between them and Dr. Jerry, it's just a wonderful team on the ground in DRC. Mr. Danny Wadis Nagoy, Mr. Emmanuel Lusua, Mr. O'Malley Pombo, Mr. Martin Kabulu, and Mr. Chansard Mapasi. Did I get that right? Okay. These gentlemen are the hands and feet of Malembe Rise when it comes to the execution of curriculum and programming on the ground. They work with Dr. Jerry, with each other, and with the students to teach 21st century skills that change the lives of the students and communities in which they live. Now that you've met everyone, let's dive into what Malembe Rise does and what makes this organization different than most nonprofit NGOs. For many years, my understanding of foreign aid was wrapped up in the business of solving problems and fixing broken systems. And while this is not inherently bad, doing the right thing for the wrong reasons usually just makes things worse. One of the most important lessons I've learned from working with Malembe Rise and trying to wrap my head around the challenges that come with this kind of work is that a problem can only be truly understood by the person who has the problem. And the problem isn't even the word problem isn't even the best way to understand it. I'll use the word challenge instead of problem from here on, because I believe it gives more respect to the individual. While a problem is an unfortunate situation, a challenge can be risen to and overcome. Words matter, as we've all been more attuned. We've all become more attuned. This means that I can't be here in the United States coming up with creative ideas to complex challenges in another part of the country or the world and expect those solutions to do anything but prolong or exacerbate the problem or the challenge. In most instances, the challenges will only become greater and give way to new, more complicated challenges. So this is where Malembe Rise comes in. The word Malembe is normally used in the saying Malembe, Malembe, which means slowly, slowly. Our co-founder, Anne-Marie Thompson, who we're lucky enough to have here tonight, she grew up in the DRC, and she loves to use the phrase Malembe, Malembe. It's a reminder to herself and others that this kind of work in international aid based on education is wrought with hardships that pop up out of nowhere on a consistent basis, and without a level head and a stubborn determination to move forward, we'd all lose our minds. But Malembe, Malembe means more than just slowly, slowly. It also carries with it the weight of purpose and significance. It is the tortoise crossing the road. Our mission statement is this: Malembe Rise envisions young people as catalysts for positive change through investments in human relationships and development of a service-centered youth leadership curriculum. We take a two-pronged approach to what we do, focusing on teachers and students. Up to this point in the history of Malembe Rise, the focus has been on creating curriculum for teachers that supplements the existing education students receive. We worked directly with the teachers, who then worked directly with the students. And this was a critical phase that led to a fully developed curriculum being used and transformed to accommodate teaching styles, classroom environments, location, and cultural differences. A portion of the curriculum that Malembe Rise developed includes studies in gardening, erosion control, and composting. These studies were put into practice by the students on school grounds. In addition to responsibilities of maintaining this student learning garden, the students and teachers developed a club of leaders to help maintain the garden. Another important part of the curriculum is community involvement. Since Malembe Rise takes a holistic approach to change, it can't stop with the teachers or students. It has to reach further than that. Just recently, the Club of Leaders, as you can see on the slide there getting on the bus, they went on a field trip to the Kinshasa Botanical Gardens. They returned home to their parents and communities full of information and ideas. The student learning gardens have already spread into the community, with more families starting gardens of their own. Community service actions are bringing parents, teachers, students, and community leaders together to share what is being learned as a result of the curriculum taught by Malembe Rise staff in Kinshasa. We choose to always walk alongside. We do not do for, we walk with. It's critical that we do our best to understand the challenges before providing solutions. We need to have involvement from everyone to find sustainable, relevant, long-term solutions for individuals and families in the communities where they live. The future of Malembe Rise, then, is to continue to co-develop sustainable solutions that replicate and scale the practice of grassroots foundational education. Our teachers, with the help of Dr. Jerry and our programming team, are changing direction starting next month in the way we achieve these goals. We'll be working with a new partner school where our teachers will begin a consultancy role, no longer just in a teaching role, but teaching the teacher. With a complete curriculum that we have developed and the experience teaching it, our teachers will be able to train a fresh audience of teachers at every grade level at the partner school to replicate this type of education going forward. We have a lot of work to do to make the change in how we operate, but as we proceed, Malembe, we are confident in our history and lessons we've learned to take us into the future of what's possible. Our focus and our mission have not changed, only the angle of our approach. In the same way that Malembe Rise walks alongside the communities where we work, we are not able to do this work without our donors walking alongside us. I'll be speaking more about that later, near the end of tonight's program, and sharing some information about a gift that we have for each of you who were in attendance in person tonight. Before I turn things back to Eli, I want to leave you with a letter from Dr. Jerry that he wrote for tonight. He says, on behalf of our DRC Malembe Rise team and our partner school team, I would like to give you greetings and thank you for walking together with us from the time we started our efforts to give good education to DRC youth through our partnership with College des Savoirs and the Mpasa community. Tonight, we are happy to see from all our common efforts how our Malembe Rise program multiplies and creates ripples of impact through the community. It's exciting to see the correlation between the development of teachers who empower students to lead and serve and the students' demonstration of 21st century skills in their community. It's also exciting to see parents acknowledge the students' impact in their community by taking initiative to organize gardens at their homes and providing precious care to them. The impact of our work is being seen in the households and neighborhoods around the school and how they've adopted the practice of gardening, which we did not see in the past. The neighborhoods are becoming green. That's it for me. Eli, back to you.
Thank you very much, Brad, for this amazing presentation of Malembe Rise, the board members, and the work that is done currently in Congo, but also through partners here as well. Before we get to the speaker of tonight, I'd like to give a couple of announcements when it comes to the Q&A session. We'll have one right after the speaker, one of their speaker goes ahead. We will have a microphone circulating around. If you have any questions, you can just raise your hand and the microphone will be at you. And for those who are joining us online, you can also write your questions in the live feed and we will ask them as well here. The speaker of tonight is amazing. I had the chance to speak with him a bit before before the event started, but I'd like to introduce him by reading a little bit about him. As a polymath in progress, Tayo Rockson is a writer, speaker, consultant, podcaster, poet, professor, co-founder, and brand strategist at UID Management, which is a strategic consulting firm that empowers organizations to incorporate sustainable diversity and inclusion practices. As the son of a diplomat, Tayo grew up understanding the nuances of multicultural diversity while living on 4 continents. He leveraged his experience to establish himself as an authority in communicating effectively across cultures and personal branding. He graced various stages to share his knowledge, including TEDx, the prestigious Chautauqua Institution, and the United Nations. Tayo is the host of As told by Nomads, which is a podcast ranked in the top 5 tier of the top 25 business podcasts for entrepreneurs on entrepreneur.com. He's the author of the book, Use Your Difference to Make a Difference, and a professor at the prestigious Imperial College Business School, as well as Felician University. In 2020, he launched a national anti-racism campaign called #Let'sTalkBias. In 2021, Tayo was named in Remote Weekly's list of the top 100 most influential remote experts and starred in the award-winning movie Impact, which is about 3 people who embark on a personal journey to transform the way they communicate on their quest to impact the world. Please welcome me with vibrant applause, and our speaker, Tayo Rockson, is coming up. Thank you.
Thank you so much, man. Appreciate it. Thank you all. Thank you, Eli. Thank you, Malembe Rise. And thank you, everyone that has braved the weather to come here today. I really appreciate it. But I want to tell you a few stories. Once upon a time, many of us thought that the world was flat. And then we thought differently. Once upon a time, the year 2000 brought with it impending doom, and planes were supposed to drop, and people were supposed to die. It was Y2K. I don't know if anyone remembers, but that was the prevailing thought, that people would vanish all of a sudden because the year 2000 was the end of times. But we're still here. Once upon a time, it was thought that you couldn't have all your media or music in the palm of your hands until a few people came along and then changed things. History has done this over and over again. Over and over again, it was impossible to imagine something until it wasn't. But history has also shown us a few other things. History has shown us inhumane things that have been normalized. Many of them are some of the bane of our existence: enslavement, colonization, occupation, segregation, invasion, disenfranchisement. We look at these things now and we say to ourselves, wait, what? That was us? We used to do that? Yeah, we did. We absolutely did. And the reason is because, in my opinion, worldviews weren't expanded enough. In the examples I listed earlier, you see what can happen once you introduce a different perspective. We make better decisions. We change our minds. We do better. But on the flip side, if many of us are in positions of feeling validated and or compensated, it becomes really hard for us to want to change or consider a different perspective. Possibility, fear. One of the spectrums of life. Possibility, fear. We've created a world based on what we think is possible and what we fear. When we allow for different perspectives to exist, I think that's leaning more towards a possibility-based culture. And when we limit perspectives, that is gearing towards a fear-based culture. But here's the thing. I believe we are currently in a fear-based culture. And that's why I want to spend the rest of today talking about the importance of an expanded worldview. Now, I believe that the equation for worldview is lived experience plus exposure. Lived experience plus exposure. And throughout the speech, I'll be showing you how to apply this equation. But my goal today is for you all to consider a different view as we navigate our world. And in pure original fashion, I'm going to use the word view as the framework for today's presentation. So view. V is for vigilance, I is for intention, E is for expanded environments, and W is for warrior mindset. Okay? Shall we proceed? All right. So vigilance. What do I want you to be vigilant for? Well, a couple of things. Social constructs and power dynamics. Social constructs and power dynamics. Social constructs are simply ideas that have been created and accepted in a society. So when you think about masculinity, femininity, gender identity, government, school, countries, anything, any of these things, these are all social constructs because we agreed to them as a society. We created these things to make sense of our world, and we have behaviors attached to these social constructs. But we're not always aware of these social constructs until we are forced to be confronted with them. I remember about 2 years after I graduated from college, so this was 2013, I was living in Virginia at the time, and I got invited to this place called Lufkin, Texas. I don't know if anyone's been to Lufkin, Texas, but close to Texas A&M. And I remember it was my first wedding. I had never been invited to a wedding, and I'd never been invited to an American wedding, I should say, where I was part of the groom. I was part of the groomsmen, so I had to do all the speeches and make sure I got my tuxes ready on time. So I hopped on a plane, we got to Houston, and from Houston, we went to Lufkin, and then I landed. I thought, wow, everything is bigger in Texas. And then as soon as I got to the church, the pastor greeted me. He said his pleasantries. Hey, how are you? Where are you from? Hey, how are you? Where are you from? Got to me. Hey, how are you? Where are you from? I'm Tayo. I'm from Nigeria. Clutches his wallet. You're not going to steal my money, are you? Like those Nigerian princes? And everybody, shh, you could hear a pin drop. And then he caught himself, he was like, that's a joke, of course, yeah, whatever. Anyways, nice to meet you. A few hours later, we're getting ready for rehearsal dinners. And then, I'm giving my speech, everyone's having a good time. An older lady, had to have been in her 80s, comes up to me and says, hey, young man, I've been watching you. You're not like all these other black folks on TV. You don't have any cornrows, no earrings, no dreads. Gotta congratulate you. Keep doing what you're doing. And I was shocked. Again, this is not my place. This is a wedding. I can't cause a scene. And I assess the situation. The only black person here. And I'm like, okay, all right, breathe. And so I thought that was it. And then, the music comes on. This is early Drake, so it was bumping. And then the N-word comes on, and everybody's like, yo, man! Looking at me, and I'm like, I need to breathe. But luckily, that was the end of the night. But that experience is something that happens multiple times over and over and over again. All those people had social constructs that limited their worldviews. They had social constructs that limited their worldview of blackness, of what it meant to be Nigerian. And in that moment, when they were forced to react to that, they reacted with what they knew. Are your social constructs limiting your worldview today? I mean, I'm not innocent. I found myself needing to update my own worldview myself. When I first came to the United States, I was 17 years old, and I don't know about you all, but for me, back then, all I knew about the United States was what I saw on TV and in the music videos. I thought every city was either California or New York, LA rather, or New York City, maybe Miami. And so I remember, coming here expecting to have Letterman jackets, being in my frat, and have everyone rush, because I heard that, I saw that in American Pie, and then I said, oh my goodness, this is what's going to happen. But so you can imagine my surprise when I came to college, and it was a town called Lynchburg, Virginia. I don't need to say anything else. Being vigilant of your social constructs matters. And the most effective way I found to do this is that equation I mentioned earlier, lived experiences plus exposure. So I want you all, everyone watching live, or maybe if you want to do this afterwards, to create two columns, lived experience, exposure. lived experience exposure. And under your lived experiences, I want you to write this. What are your current social constructs? What social constructs do you subscribe to and why? What social constructs do you subscribe to and why? And under the exposure column, I want you to write who or what exposed you to these social constructs. So, lived experiences, what social constructs do you subscribe to and why? And then under the lived experience, who or what exposed you to these social constructs? This will give you an idea of how you currently categorize the world, how you label the world, if you will. It'll also keep you alert for disinformation and misinformation. Disinformation is more sinister. Misinformation is still the wrong information. The second thing we need to be more vigilant about is, power dynamics. To understand power dynamics is to understand how influence and control is being distributed, right? In every environment, influence and control gets distributed, and depending on who has the influence, depending on who has the control, there is a dynamic. Some of it is natural in some instance. Some of you might say, hey, I'm the older brother, I'm the parent, I'm the teacher. There's a power dynamic there. But there are power dynamics everywhere around us. But what I want you to do is to dig a little deeper, even beyond the obvious. Observe your interpersonal and professional environments. Are you comfortable with what you see? Are you comfortable with what you see? I want you to look for moments of imbalance, oppression, and suppression. I spent the first decade of my life in Nigeria under 3 military regimes, 2 of them dictatorships. General Sani Abacha, who died of a supposed heart attack, and General Ibrahim Babangida. Babangida was tamer than Abacha. But either way, Babangida and Abacha, under the regimes, these were the things we had to be constantly vigilant, for, because of, the tribe we were from, because of my dad's job, because of every situation that social constructs created. But if we stop and actually act more vigilant, I think you'd be surprised by the moments of imbalance, misuse, and abuse. So, again, you're going to get out your pens. And under the 2 columns, let's apply this. Under lived experiences, I want you to ask yourself 2 questions. What authority figures in your life exist? Or, reframed, who are the authority figures in your life right now? And when have you been an authority figure in your life? As you're asking yourself these questions, who are the authority figures in your life? When have you been an authority figure? I want you to observe how power, how influence, how control was distributed. I want you to observe the behaviors, and I want you to be as honest as possible, because that's the best way we're going to get to where we want to get to today. And under exposure, I want you to ask yourself 2 more questions. Who do you create social distance from? Who do you create social distance from today, and why? Social distancing is a norm now with COVID, but I would argue that we've been social distancing from people for a long time, throughout history. And for whatever reason, we've had to make this social distance, consciously, unconsciously, we have our reasons. But who do you social distance from today, and why? And then, who have you social distanced from in the past, and why? 2 questions. A constant vigilance on social constructs and power dynamics means a constant vigilance on systems. Social constructs, power dynamics make up the systems that exist today. And so, if you're able to be vigilant, with these things, you're also more able to be aware of the contracts that you sign with society every day. I know when the world stopped in the last year, a lot of us were surprised by what we saw, or a lot of us were afraid that our worst fears were materialized. But these are the contracts that many of us have signed with our actions or inactions. And if we're not vigilant about them, it's going to be less surprising as each year comes. This also allows you to zoom out and paint a big picture. And like any artist, you need to see the whole canvas. So I want you all to embrace your inner Basquiats. And maybe like Basquiat, you can come up with a different image every time, a different interpretation of what you're seeing the world is. I think as we constantly remain vigilant, we're going to constantly be refreshing what the world looks like because we're getting more information. One experience does not define everyone. One experience does not define a country. One experience does not define a company. And as people, we only rise to the level of awareness and vigilance that we have. So, let's move on to I, intention. Now that you've gotten a sense of how you see the world and maybe why you see the world the way you see it, I want you to intentionally create a culture of accountability. I want you to intentionally create a culture of accountability in the environments that have been erected by the social constructs and power dynamics that exist. And I believe that we need to do this because, like I said in the intro, we have a bad habit of rewarding bad behavior. We've done that several times. We do that almost every year, every generation, every decade, every century. There are several bad behaviors that we reward, and we make this culture. And if you don't believe me, look at the codes that we have today. Guy code, girl code, blue wall of silence. Any of these things have engineered codes to protect members, often at the expense of the harmed. That is not to say that there isn't a benefit of being a guy or a lady or a cop. But when there's a moment for responsibility to be taken care of, a lot of times throughout history, the instinct has been to protect based on membership and not impact. And when we protect based on membership and not impact, we're getting back to that same trap that we always do. This person looks like me, so it doesn't matter what they're doing that's bad right now. This is what leads the proverbial day to say that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely, but I, for one, don't believe that is 100% true. And this is coming from a person that has lived under dictatorships. I don't believe power always corrupts. I don't believe absolute power always corrupts absolutely. I believe Uncle Ben when he told Peter Parker that with great power comes great responsibility. So what's your responsibility? I believe your responsibility here is to understand the emotions behind the inability to be accountable. What is preventing you from being accountable? If I'm to share mine, it's usually fear, it's usually shame, anger, insecurity. It might be the same for you, it might be different, but when we're not honest about why we are afraid to take responsibility for actions that we might have taken, consciously or unconsciously, there's no moving forward. The default response becomes, that can't be me. I'm a good person. Ask him, ask her, ask them. I'm a good person. But you can be a good person in a bad system. In fact, many of us have been good people in bad systems because we individualize the problems and fail to understand that every single thing that we have today is systemic. Remember, power dynamics, accountability, social constructs. So, the only way we can get out of a bad system is if we have checks and balances. And in the spirit of checks and balances, again, those columns, under your lived experiences, I want you to answer the following. What emotions do you usually feel when you're getting defensive? It's a simple question. What emotions do you usually feel when you're getting defensive? It's going to be different for everyone, but whenever I do workshops and I'm working with companies that might have made huge mistakes, a lot of times they don't get to the root issue. And sometimes the root issue for the companies might just be, well, we might lose market share, or we might lose brand value. People might not want to come and work here. And so we have to cover this up. But that's always a short-term approach to a long-term problem. Now, if the answer was, hey, we messed up, we realized this is what we did, and we acknowledge that this has limited this impact, and we've participated in misuse and abuse here, here's our plan for growth, there's trust that's built there. I think sometimes we confuse ourselves thinking that if we hide behind our emotions that are preventing us from being accountable, that we are, able to move forward and prevent that shame and that public humiliation. But one's short term and one's long term. Also ask yourself, what are moments that you've refused to act when you know deep down that you should have? What are moments that you've refused to act when you know that deep down you should have? We've all been there. And then ask yourself why. What was it? What was it that prevented you? And then last but not least, I want you to have your compass always there. What are your values? And how have you lived them out in the past as lived experiences? So you're asking what your values are. You're asking and reflecting on moments you have chosen not to act when you know that you should have. And you're asking yourself the honest question. What are you truly feeling when you get defensive? You've lived with yourself the longest, so I'm hoping you can be honest with yourself the most. Under the exposure section, what I want you to do here is to take it out to institutions. What are times you've observed institutions refusing to act when they could have done better? Why do you think that was? What are times that institutions could have acted better, but didn't? Why do you think that is? And then the last question on that end is, what moments in your life caused you to adopt your value system? What moments in your life caused you to adopt your value system? It could be as simple as watching Superman on the screen, or Ted Lasso, or Randall in This Is Us, and seeing someone do something that is quintessentially them, despite what the outside opinion is. Now, I'm naming 3 people that have influenced me, obviously, but for you, it could be different, right? It could be anyone. And it could be Cardi B, it could be Daffy Duck, it could be anyone, but you are reacting to something that is causing you to say, that's who I want to be. And I find that we find these moments of, in sync moments, rather, when we are reading portraits of ourselves and others, or portraits of our idealized selves and others, seeing it, hearing it. It was Nelson Mandela for me as well when I was 10, because he was the only black person that I saw from a free nation when I was under siege. Again, there are clues throughout your life. Your lived experiences and your exposure gives you insight into your worldviews and what you need to expand. The more you do this, the more you train your mind to promote transparency and to create feedback loops. Because you're going to find out things you're not going to like about yourselves. You're going to find those things out. No one's perfect. And in those moments, whether it's through a therapist, through a close friend, or through someone you may have offended upon reflection, you get those feedback loops. And through feedback, there's growth. Hey, I just realized I did all this. I didn't want, to be a perpetuator of this behavior, and I'm sorry. And I understand that you may not be ready to forgive me, but I do want you to know that I'm acknowledging my role in this. Many of those things have to happen regularly, whether it's with our spouse or friends, ex-friends. Some of you may have been bullies in high school. not canceling anyone, just talking about the fact that we all have moments of growth. But we need to be honest with ourselves as a society and as individuals if we're ever going to get to the moment where we can stop rewarding bad behavior. And that has to come from intentionally creating cultures of accountability. If we don't start holding ourselves, people, and systems accountable, what is the incentive to change? Moving on to E for expanding environments. This is about understanding what I call equally as good alternatives. And it's also about increasing access to information. I'm sure by now you're understanding that with more information you do better, and with more information you get more curious, and with more information you learn about the world. But you're also understanding that sometimes we have paradigms that make you think there is no need for other information. And when you think there's no need for other information, it's very hard for you not to think that you're better than others. And then when you think you're better than others, it's very hard for you to want to move or understand another perspective or even consider another alternative. Yet, people celebrate birthdays in different ways. Yet, people have different ways of affirming self. Your way isn't the only way, and it's not the highway, but neither is theirs. There's beauty that comes from that semblance. We sometimes convince ourselves that we live in a binary world when we in fact live in a world of nuance. And it's modeled on our TV screens. I'm a huge sports fan, and oftentimes I'll see shows, debate shows. There'll be, is Tom Brady the greatest football player, or is he the worst football player? Well, I don't know if he's the best or the worst. Nah, stick with an opinion. You gotta have your conviction. Tell me if it's the worst or the best. But I think another person, nah, you're not good for TV. We need hot takes. Fox, MSNBC, CNN, any of these things. Whatever story gets the most clicks, gets the most reaction on whatever side you are, seems to carry the day. But in the absence of nuance, what we are promoting is, this caricatures, extreme versions of stories that may be true, but aren't always true. So, as your expanded environment, I want you to become more aware of your privileges. Certainly at this moment, you found that, hey, you've had access to certain things that others might not have had access to. And so just keep asking yourself, what are equally as good alternatives? And one way to do this is by inviting more stories of belonging, support, and access. I learned this as a professor during COVID, and I just started asking my students this question. When I was teaching during COVID, well, hopefully we're waning now with COVID, but at the height of COVID, when everything was virtual, I found myself asking my students this question: what does support mean for you? What does belonging mean for you? What does success mean for you? And they're all different answers. Some had access to Wi-Fi, some didn't. Some were caretakers all of a sudden, and so couldn't make it at certain times. Some just wanted to get a C, some wanted to get an A, some needed to graduate. But we go into many different environments, and we think we know what support, belonging, and success means for them. And then we dictate that. We make it law. And then we occupy and colonize without asking for any input. That has happened so much throughout. Metaphorically, literally, today, yesterday, it happens constantly. So, I'm just inviting you to ask yourself the following questions, and then to ask these questions as you dive into new environments. What does support mean for you? What does belonging mean for you? And what does success mean for you? This is your template. I've been guiding you through two different columns throughout the talk, but these three questions here This is inviting other people's lived experiences and what other people are exposed to. It's giving you insight into their lived experiences and their exposure so you don't fall into the trap where your idea becomes superior to others instead of on par to them. It also leads to more accurate recordings of history and more validation of people. People we don't often see in our textbooks or on the TV screens. It leads to a fullness of self that deserves to be felt. One of the things I find as I move to different environments is that the concept of freedom is often defined in multiple ways. And two of the pronounced ways are, for some people, freedom is the ability to say and do whatever they want to do or say without consequence. And then for another group of people, freedom is the desire to be one's full self without punishment. There's a huge chasm between saying what you want to do without consequence and being yourself without punishment. Unfortunately, being yourself is legislated against in some situations. But if we are going to expand in environments, if we're going to take our privileges to different places and work with the power dynamics that comes with that, we need to also take responsibility and make sure that we are creating access. And the best way to create access is not to assume. I heard a saying about people that make assumptions. It's to invite. What does support mean for said group of people? What does belonging mean for said group of people? And what does success mean for said group of people? Last but certainly not least is W for the warrior mindset. Now, my name is Tayo, so Tayo is short for it, but Akin means the brave one, a warrior. So I had to be a little self-indulgent here and incorporate warrior into the acronym. But I've always been fascinated with warriors. And the reason is because when I look and observe the most influential leader to me, that was obviously the late Nelson Mandela, and I often mention him, but also Audre Lorde, James Baldwin, any of these folks, right? They all had one thing in common, and that was the idea of fighting for lived experiences that weren't centered, right? They consistently did that, and they did that constantly. That is to say that it wasn't a trend, it wasn't a hobby, it was a lifestyle. It wasn't a trend, it wasn't a hobby, it was a lifestyle. And that's what it means to have the warrior mindset. To be able to work outside of the news cycle. To be able to work beyond the news cycle. We've seen many things happen in the last year. The anti-blackness, anti-Asian violence. What's happening in Afghanistan? What's happening throughout the continent of Africa? What's happening in Latin America? What's happening in Louisiana? These things are happening every day. Don't think they happen once an extreme situation happens, because that would be an insult to the lived experiences of the people that go through that every day. And so, if you are choosing to be a warrior, there has to be that Malembe mindset. That slow and steady wins the race. That methodical precision to working towards the goals you have decided to fight for. The other element of that is critical thinking. Critical thinking here is going to be your tool for war in a sense here. But the secret to critical thinking, at least in my opinion, is knowing how to express yourself and why you express yourself. That is all it is. How do you express yourself and why do you express yourself? I find that a lot of people don't know who they are outside of whatever social constructs have been created for them. That is because they haven't been reflective. They've been mostly reactive. And if you're mostly reactive as opposed to reflective, you don't know who you are. But if you're operating as a caricature in an environment that has been created to serve certain people versus other people, you become a pawn. And if you're a pawn, you're not a queen, you're not a king, and you can't fight for other people who deserve to feel privileges that allows them to feel the fullness of the spectrum of their humanity. And so critical thinking is your ability to understand why you think the way you think and how you think the way you think, because this is an effective form of rebuttal. Someone with said power comes to you and says, I don't believe said group of people deserve this. And you question them and you have your ability to defend your points. That's effective. We see this during debates. There are people that can say the right things in the right moment. And I said earlier, we have a clickbaity culture. Someone will read the headline and not do the work. But if you know the work and you know why the work isn't effective, you can call out any straw person argument or any distraction. You are a warrior in that mindset. And so it's sharpening your critical thinking skills. It's understanding that the idea of fighting for lived experiences that aren't centered is a lifelong goal. Because if it's not a lifelong goal, the default doesn't work for everybody else. Our dear Lord once said, sometimes we're blessed with being able to choose the time and the arena and the manner of our revolution. But more usually, we must do battle where we're standing. Sometimes we're blessed to be able to choose the time, the arena, and the manner of our revolution. But more usually, we must do battle where we're standing. Everyone here is metaphorically standing. I know you all sitting now, but you're metaphorically standing. You're standing on something, standing for something, whether you decide to acknowledge it or not. The question, though, is will you choose to do battle? Will you? We have created the world around us based on what we think is possible and what we fear. There's a possibility-based culture, there's a fear-based culture, and I believe that we are currently living in a fear-based culture, which is why I think it's important to have an expanded mindset. So V, be vigilant. I, be intentional about the cultures of accountability. E, expand the environments that you are by promoting more safety, belonging, and success. And W, have a warrior mindset. Thank you very much. Thank you. Is it up? Yeah, here. Oh, sorry.
We would like to proceed with question and answers. So if you have any questions, please just raise your hand and the microphone will be right at you.
I threw a lot.
I've got a question. What is your involvement in Malembe Rise?
My involvement, Sarah found me online over a year ago, and we share a connection for the Africa and diaspora and the continent. But my goal is always to expand stories of the continent because there's so much beauty that's been. That hasn't been unearthed, and we often only hear the stereotypes, and we don't provide enough opportunities to the many beautiful youth in the nation and the continent as a whole. So, yeah.
Hey, Tayo.
Hi.
Yeah, enjoyed that. Thanks a lot. I was wondering, so You mentioned you lived in numerous, 10 continents or 10, 10 countries, several continents?
5 countries, 4 continents.
Okay. So you bounced around quite a bit.
No, it's close.
But what are some of the ways what was instrumental for you in expanding your worldview, moving around so much, by also remaining true to yourself at the same time and having a sense of being grounded? And how did you do that, for yourself?
Well, I wasn't always grounded. Let me start there. I had a lot of insecurities growing up, especially during my youth and the formative periods of my life. And I used to, I had kids who make fun of my hair and lips and all these things. And so I used to always purse my lips so I could have a softer lip. And I always wished I had a relaxer and all these things. But there was a common presence at home with my mom. And my mom always had she always had her way of reminding me that I was worthy of being black. Being black was enough for me. And as I started to get older and go through high school, I started to observe different reactions to me. Because I remember going from one year, being this skinny Nigerian kid with a thick Nigerian accent in a French-speaking country in an American international school, going through puberty, and then I go to Nigeria, and then I have a very different accent, and I'm taller, and I'm playing all the sports, and then they're treating me like an American. And it made me sad because I thought, wait, they don't think I'm Nigerian, and they think I'm higher because I sound American now. And then I remember doing the little inventory for me here, thinking, am I promoting an idea that is alienating what it is to be a Nigerian? And it really got me deep down into changing some things. I used to go by Rockson before then, and then it became, I took my name back, and it was Tayo. And I used to go by Rockson because people couldn't pronounce my name. And so I started doing little things like that, and I said, I'll take my name back, it'll be Tayo, and I'll correct people when they said wrong things about the country. And then I started writing and finding other people that were like me. And in the process of finding other people like me and reading about the work, I found more confidence with that. So, yeah. Go ahead.
How did you reconcile, or what did you mentioned being a Nigerian in America, you came over here at age 10, and at what point did you start to feel more African-American and less African? Or does it ever blend, does it ever intersect? I'm just curious about how that...
So I've always felt African and Nigerian, but other people have had different opinions of that. And so when I first came here, people obviously most people didn't assume that I was Nigerian because you look different, you sound different and all that. But I've actually found myself being more African the older I've grown because it's more intentional now. I'm like, hey, look, this is my passport and this is the only thing I'm here, and we speak English. And if we need a history lesson about why we speak English, I'm happy to tell you that, but it's still here. And the thing that I would say on the African American side is I'm always learning about the experiences because, there's many times in America where you will be reminded of your blackness. And I remember being stopped. I can't remember. It's happened a few times. I remember being stopped on the road in Lynchburg, Virginia. And then, people start talking to you in a different way. And then you start learning the codes. And like, hey, don't aggravate this person. I remember going to stores where everybody left. I remember coming here. So I just you had to learn quickly. I didn't even have the choice of the matter. And so, I did my history. And for me, I'm always constantly learning what the nuance is. But it all comes down to the idea of, I think the story of blackness hasn't been fully told. And it's still yet to unfold because it's never been fully inculcated in the textbooks. And so for me, I embrace being black on 4 continents, but number one identity is Nigerian for me because I know that being Nigerian and being who I am is maybe going to give another Nigerian confidence to express the elements of their identity. So, yeah. No problem. Yes, you. Oh, you have another question?
Is this on?
Is it on? Yeah.
Do you really think social constructs can be changed? I mean, basically everything is a social construct. Black's a social construct. We could have chosen eye color, height, weight, etc. And I found myself looking at a magazine the other day, and there was an ad there, and it had a black man and a white woman advertising for something. And it just struck me at the time that I see a black man and a white woman. I don't see two people. And I'm not sure I'll ever be able to change that, even though I don't consider myself having any problems with that. That's still what I see. And I was talking to my students the other day, and do you think it's just time? I told them I hope they just see two people when they're looking at that eventually. But do you think that's just a time thing, or do you think social constructs can really be changed?
Well, I don't think social constructs are bad inherently. I don't think we need to change them. I actually advocate people to see color. I always tell people that all the time, because I remember after the unfortunate murder of George Floyd and everything else, people would come up to me and say, I don't see color, I don't see it. And I'm like, no, we need to see that because you need to understand the experience attached to that. What I do think we need to do with social constructs is understand the power dynamics attached to each of them. That's more what I think we need to observe and investigate more, because I think it's beautiful to be, Latinx and, to be straight, to be gay, to be who you are. But the problem exists when we attach positive and negative meanings or hierarchical meanings to these social constructs, and then it becomes, maybe if you're looking at a magazine, I saw two people with different backgrounds, this person is better than that person. And if we're teaching that subconsciously or consciously to our kids, that's more what I fear. And I think that's where we get into trouble. But yeah, embrace the difference. Hey, use your difference to make a difference. So, hear a question?
Thanks for being here.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for being here.
Absolutely. So when you were talking about Texas and you were talking about Lynchburg, just the mention of the locations, as much as many of us would like to think that we are open-minded and welcoming, the mention of those two locations provoked something in me. And I'm guessing I'm not the only one. And maybe, did that happen to you too, as you were contemplating going to these places? And then if so, how do you hold the tension of possibly needing to protect yourself in those environments, along with wanting to have an expanded view where you've landed? Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. So I said earlier, I spent the first decade of my life in a dictatorship. So for me, I was always on alert. I remember, we used to have we had gunshots, at least where I was, and we had moments where, before we transitioned to civilian rule in '99, we had moments where my parents would tell me, don't say this around this group of people. And so, but even before I came to America, my dad did a good job of educating me on multiple things. Lynchburg was the one that triggered me the most, though, not even Texas, because I was like, wait, I got good grades, Dad. It's like an extreme punishment here. What are we doing? But I had to look up the history, and then, apparently it's an unfortunate name. But but yes, I definitely was on high alert. And then I remember I went to school during the Obama years, and you were really made aware. It was a very conservative university. Nothing against conservatives. I'm just saying, it was a very conservative university, so Obama wasn't popular on campus. And I remember when Obama won, there was a celebration, and particularly among the black folks, especially the African American folks. And I got carried in a wave of it. I was like, I didn't vote. I can't vote. Yeah. And then the next day on campus, a divide. Like a lot of the teachers, professors, and white folks who thought that he was the devil were on this side, and you could just see that silent treatment. And that's when I started to understand a lot of all these things. Texas, I heard the stories, but Texas also has like a large Nigerian population, specifically Houston. So I was like, I'll be fine. But then I didn't think that I would experience that with my friend's wedding. So it didn't even cross my mind. And then once I got there, after getting that greeting from the pastor, that's when I was like, I immediately had that muscle memory. I was like, okay. And my muscle memory was, don't do anything to raise any more suspicion. Wear this, leave when you need to leave, and stay in your room. That was all it was. And that happens every day for Muslim people. I wish it didn't have to happen, but I immediately was on high alert. But yeah, and I was thinking, letting my brother, texting my brother, hey, I'm here. And so, yeah, those are the moments that it happens, though. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Tayo. Very inspiring and thought-provoking. So that's a good thing, huh?
Thank you.
I wondered, bringing this back to education,
Yeah.
I wonder how you would apply the view model to cross-cultural work.
Yes.
Okay, so you grew up in Nigeria. You're familiar with the colonizer. You're familiar with missionaries. You're familiar with many different types of interventions.
Right.
And I'd like to hear a little bit more about your thoughts on cross-cultural work based on your lived experience and also the view model.
So if I'm going to use the view model of myself, when I was younger, the subconscious messages about who's better were, I don't like using Western versus Eastern because I don't know what's West or East, but Western culture is more, is better, it's more processed, highly organized. Go here, you're going to be better. Even the subconscious messages, you get an education, stay there, don't come back sometimes, right? Those were the subconscious messages that were there. And we got these messages time and time again through music, through movies and pop culture references. In some of the textbooks, if it was a British curriculum, because I went through, I think, 7 curriculums. If it was a British curriculum, you also taught every history except the history of the country and the continent, which is always something that I wasn't thinking consciously of, but it was just there. And then when I was going through the Nigerian curriculum was the only time that I saw the Nigerian history and the West African history. So it starts there, to be vigilant about what's in the curriculum, right? And then the intention about those accountability things is making sure that each educator, each person that is, exerting influence or control of a classroom understands the lived identities and lived experiences of that. And those people get to see themselves in TVs, in screens, and examples. And I see this every day as a professor because, I'm often the youngest person in the room, but now I'm not as a professor. And so there are many references I find having to refresh, and I'm like, no one, I'll just see glazed stares, and they're like, what is this guy talking about? I didn't do that. And so I have to ask them, the whole first day of class is all, hey, what do you like? Tell me what you do. Where did you grow up? And I'm getting insight into that, and that's giving more information. As far as expanding environments, it's a dialogue, right? We get them to talk about moments where they felt they're most authentic. And in a lot of educational systems, there's an authoritative approach to it where it doesn't allow for critical thinking, it doesn't allow for expression, it doesn't allow for dialogue. I know when I grew up, talking back was always frowned upon, even if I disagreed with something. And I think we should also apply that to history because, I think if we start asking questions in history, we might say, hey, this Christopher Columbus person, I get that maybe he discovered this part, whether it was by accident or not, but what about the people that were on the land before? We talk about the experiences? Is there maybe, that idea, and then you start asking these questions where, you don't have to necessarily come up with a right or wrong, but you're expanding that environment of that story, and then they're like, they're going to come up with their own conclusions, as opposed to telling them that this is a good guy and this is a bad guy. The colonizer was good, they were stronger, and without understanding the underlying methods. And when I learned history growing up, I didn't have access to even questioning those things. And then with the warrior mindset, it's really about fighting for every one of your students. many times you can observe, whether an introvert is disadvantaged as opposed to an extrovert based on the activity, whether someone has a different opportunity based on family background or tribal, association, affiliation, and all these things are things that we get more, used to seeing if we practice that. And so, yeah, it's always in tandem for me when I see that. So, yeah. Hey,
I've got a couple questions from online.
yes.
They're similar, but I'll ask them as two separate ones. The first is, what is the biggest advice you would give to teens on developing an expanded worldview, both for minority and non-minority teens?
Self-learning, and self-learning, and self-learning, and self-learning. I know, Eli, you were asking me what I did to eventually get to the career path. I know, Ruth, you met me at the beginning of my career path in 2013, not shortly after the wedding. But I found that I needed to come up with a curriculum for myself. So, because I just come out of this car accident, and I was like, what is my life? And I realized I wasn't a lawyer, doctor, engineer, so I was a failure, quote unquote, with the standard, and I didn't have those interests. So I said, well, let me give myself permission to be interested in things that I'm interested in. I don't think we give students and teens permission to be interested in the things that they're interested in, because maybe we feel like it's not going to be as successful or generate enough income or provide enough opportunity. But when you encourage the teen to say, okay, fine, you love sports, I want you to learn everything about the sports industry. I know you want to be an athlete, but also tell me about the business side of that. Okay. You love arts? Okay. Tell me, be able to express to me your artistic style and your influences, and I want you to, to submit this project. Tell me the history of that. You want to be, a pilot? Why? All these things. When you get people doing that, you're going to find them being enthusiastic because, one, you gave them permission, and you didn't shoot it down, and then they're just going to be like, oh, I'm already passionate about this. I'm going to spend all my time. If it's video games you love, well, what is the business of video game and esports? How does that play into that? So giving people permission to create their own curriculums and affirming them and not shutting them, those ideas down. And also understanding that your role in many instances, especially as a role model, is to guide them and to offer advice when, asked. I think just that is going to lead them to be able to build trust. At least that's what I've learned from being part of Big Brother, Big Sister with my mentee of 6 years now. So, yeah.
Thanks. The second one is, what advice would you give to a person or congregation that is endeavoring to be vigilant and intentional as to how they best engage day to day with those who have a more fear-based worldview? Still light.
Yeah. Well, I mean, something I wonder about with churches, I grew up as a Christian, and the school I went to was Liberty University, the largest Christian university in the world. So some of you might know Liberty University. It was on the heels of Jerry Falwell's death. So yeah, there's a lot that I observed, but something that I noticed being a Christian who went to the school is I never actually got the sense that the church understood the congregation, and it was very, and I found that in multiple ways, because when they would ask for offerings or they would talk about testimonies, it would often be the same type of stories, and I'd be like, where was the invitation to get to share these stories? I didn't even know that there was that invitation. And in the examples that they did, the cultural examples that they showed, it was often just the same type of culture. And so one way that I would suggest, I don't know if it's possible in churches, is when you have all these peer-led groups, actually encourage them to suggest sermons that can be said on Sunday, because the Sunday sermons are the ones that are actually said all the time. And so if it's something to do with Black Lives, for example, giving someone an opportunity to actually give a sermon and for you to take a step back is very important, right? If we're on the heels of the Me Too movement, people that have dealt with that level of abuse, and I know it happens in the church as well, the opportunity to share these stories and to have these conversations, as opposed to appearing as the authority. And I think there's a chasm that comes when you're the authority every time. It makes this barrier wider, and if people feel like they can't come to you with their real problems, because if they come to you with their problems, they will be shamed, and then if they're shamed, they might be excommunicated from the church, which I feel is a little bit extreme and hypocritical of what Jesus was. So I think that's what I would say. But then again, I'm not a pastor, so I don't know.
Any questions? If not, please give a huge round of applause to Tayo.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I would like to welcome Brad again to stage to talk about a few more things, and then we'll move on to the closing remarks. Thank you.
I only have one page this time. All right. Pop quiz time. What does Malembe mean? Who can tell me? Slowly, slowly. Okay. We didn't cover the rise part of Malembe Rise. Rising is standing up, it's stepping forward, it's volunteering, it's putting yourself out there. We need that from our donors. Just in the way Malembe Rise walks alongside the teachers and students and communities, we need our donors to walk alongside us. It's very important for us to have that donor relationship, that donor buy-in to what we're doing, that partnership that is so very important to enabling us to do what we do and to change the lives of students and teachers and communities in a small space that can make a big impact. So you wouldn't be here tonight if you weren't interested in education and in the support. So I'm asking you, will you walk with us? Will you support us? Will you continue to put yourself out there, change your worldview, continue to expand your influence, and just expose yourself to all of the opportunities that you have to succeed? We will greatly appreciate your partnership and your support going forward.